The word doomsday is one of those phrases reserved for nuclear nightmares and apocalypse scenarios. But for more than a decade, a single program deep inside the Russian defense establishment has carried that nickname in public imagination, Poseidon. Announced in cinematic terms in the 2010s and later shown in state briefings as a monstrous, autonomous underwater torpedo armed with a thermonuclear payload, Poseidon has been described by some as a novel strategic weapon and by others as a superbly effective piece of strategic theater. Whether viewed as a real addition to Russia's deterrent, a political signaling tool, or a partly speculative system wrapped in secrecy, the torpedo forces a simple question back onto the table. What happens when nuclear weapons are married to long-range autonomy in the ocean? Over the next 40 minutes, we will trace the origins of Poseidon, examine what the open sources say, and don't say iron about its capabilities, explain how it is supposed to operate, weigh the terrifying scenarios that have been spun around it against sober technical analysis, and consider what its existence means for strategy, crisis stability, and the future of undersea warfare. Along the way, we'll separate demonstrable facts from hype and lay out the realistic strengths and limits of a weapon whose reputation is sometimes bigger than its proven performance. Russia's path toward an autonomous nuclear torpedo grew from a simple, strategic problem: how to ensure retaliatory power and complicate an opponent's defense calculations in an age of missile defense, precision tracking, and high-tech surveillance. In public descriptions by Kremlin leaders and state media, Poseidon was presented as a response to Western technological advantages in missile defenses and anti-submarine warfare, a way to preserve second strike options by attacking from an unexpected domain, deep under the sea. The concept surfaced in Russian disclosures and defense shows in the mid-2010s, with official statements framing Poseidon not merely as a large torpedo, but as an oceanic multi-purpose system that could carry high-yield warheads, travel at great depth and speed, and operate autonomously for long distances. That messaging served two purposes: to signal a technical edge to domestic and foreign audiences, and to complicate NATO planning by adding a weapon that is hard to detect and hard to counter with traditional missile defenses. International analysts, while intrigued, cautioned early on that state announcements often mix demonstrable testing with aspirational claims. Nevertheless, the scale of Russian investment and public discussion soon made Poseidon a central piece of Moscow's military modernization narrative. Open-source descriptions of Poseidon paint the picture of a very large unmanned underwater vehicle, more like a mini-submarine than a conventional torpedo. The vehicle is reported to be roughly 20 meters long and up to 2 meters in diameter, propelled by a small nuclear reactor that gives it essentially unlimited underwater endurance compared with battery-powered or fuel-limited drones. Published estimates and intelligence assessments over the years have suggested a potential range measured in thousands of kilometers, a maximum operating depth far below typical surface sonar coverage, and transit speeds far faster than conventional torpedoes, all features intended to make it difficult to intercept. Russian presentations have emphasized ruggedness, autonomous navigation, including GLONASS integration, and a very large warhead option. Western analysts have debated yields, with many treating the extreme 100 megatons, figures that circulated in early media, reports skeptically, and suggesting that more modest multi-megaton yields are realistic for a heavy thermonuclear payload. In short, Poseidon is claimed to combine deep depth, long-range, high-speed, and a large warhead to threaten coastal military and infrastructure targets, while also complicating missile defense and anti-submarine calculations. A critical aspect of Poseidon's operational concept is deployment. How do you get a 20-meter autonomous underwater vehicle into the ocean and on mission? Public reporting and defense research indicate that Russia intends to launch Poseidon from large, modified submarines designed as motherships, among them the specially modified Belgorod submarine and possibly other revamped Oscar-class hulls. These mother subs provide concealment, mobility, and the ability to bring Poseidon within range of distant targets while reducing the risk to the launch platform. Because the vehicle itself is nuclear-powered and designed for long ranges, the combination of a long-range submarine carrier and an autonomous torpedo would let launches occur from safe standoff positions in the Arctic or Barents, from the deep Atlantic approaches, or from forward areas in the Mediterranean. That deployment model significantly shapes both its strategic use and its vulnerability. A large, slow mothership is itself a target, and the feasibility of long-range Poseidon operations depends on Russia's ability to operate those modified submarines in contested waters. The pairing of Belgorod and Poseidon has been specifically noted in official and expert accounts. Arguably the most dramatic element of the Poseidon story is the image of a torpedo-launched thermonuclear device creating a radioactive tsunami that washes entire coastlines with fallout. That image has been repeated in media and political commentary because it captures the imagination. Underwater detonation produces massive water displacement, coastal devastation, and contamination. But serious technical analysts caution that the radioactive tsunami scenario is both geographically and physically constrained. The effectiveness of a tsunami depends on where a detonation occurs relative to continental shelves, coastal topography, and depth. Not every underwater explosion generates a catastrophic wave across an entire ocean. Moreover, the scale of explosion needed to create a truly civilization-threatening tsunami is enormous, and fallout patterns would vary widely. The civilian and military consequences would be appalling in affected zones, but the picture is more complex than a single doomsday wave wiping out entire hemispheres. This is not to downplay the weapon's destructive potential. A multi-megaton offshore detonation against a coastal city would cause catastrophic blast, fire, and radioactive contamination in local regions. But the lurid global tsunami stories are often exaggerations of the technical reality. Responsible analysis therefore separates the torpedo's real local devastation potential from hyperbolic accounts of planet-wide tidal disasters. From a strategic point of view, Poseidon serves multiple roles for Kremlin planners. First, it is intended as a supplement to traditional nuclear forces, complicating an adversary's planning by adding a weapon that can be launched under the sea and is difficult to track. That forces NATO and others to consider an additional axis of vulnerability: coastal cities, naval bases, and port infrastructure. Second, Poseidon is a signaling instrument. It communicates resolve, technological reach, and the political will to develop asymmetric tools in response to perceived threats, such as missile defenses. Third, because it is a non-traditional strategic weapon, it introduces ambiguity during a crisis. Attribution, lawful response options, and laddering decisions become murkier when unmanned undersea weapons are involved. So how should the world judge Poseidon? The sober answer is both straightforward and unsettling. Poseidon embodies real destructive potential and complicates strategic stability, yet it also faces significant engineering, operational, and logistical constraints that limit the immediacy of the doomsday narrative. Russia appears to have invested in production and trials, making Poseidon a material factor in strategic calculations. At the same time, the lethal imagery often attached to the weapon overstates what is technically straightforward. A torpedo with a large warhead launched in certain coastal environments could be devastating locally, but so many variables determine total impact that global tsunami headlines mislead as often as they frighten. The safer policy response is to treat Poseidon as a wake-up call. Invest in undersea detection and resilience, update crisis communication channels among nuclear powers, and engage in targeted diplomatic efforts to reduce the risks of unplanned escalation in the undersea domain. That approach recognizes the weapon's reality without feeding hysteria, and it preserves room for arms control. Initiatives that might limit the most destabilizing uses of unmanned strategic systems. The Poseidon program forces a larger question about how modern societies will manage the fusion of autonomous systems and strategic weapons. Do we let technical momentum drive policy, or do we shape technology with rules that reduce catastrophic risk? The choice matters because Poseidon is not simply a Russian curiosity. It represents an inflection point in strategic technology, If nations fail to build cooperative norms, the oceans could become the next theater of ambiguous, fast-moving shocks with nuclear consequences. If policymakers act sooner, through better detection infrastructure, clearer rules of engagement, and renewed dialogue among nuclear powers, the worst risks can be narrowed. For viewers concerned about strategic stability, the immediate steps are concrete. Press your representatives to prioritize maritime domain awareness and arms control engagement. Support investment in civil resilience for coastal communities, and demand transparency from governments about the deployment and doctrines of unmanned strategic systems. The future of deterrence now faces a new variable, and how states respond will shape whether Poseidon becomes a permanent scar on security or a managed risk within a renewed architecture of stability. If you found this detailed look helpful, subscribe for more in-depth documentaries on strategic weapons, emerging military technologies, and the geopolitics that shape them. Tell us in the comments which part of Poseidon you want explained next. The science behind compact reactors, the submarine platforms that carry it, or a technical simulation of tsunami physics. And we'll make it the next episode.